Well, hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show on the 12th of September, 2019. And I promise I won't forget to put the maps up like I did yesterday. Obviously, much going on. Some nice changes here in the Northeast. The cold front's moving southward, getting rid of the very warm to hot conditions from north to south. And that front's going to make it all the way down into southern Virginia, maybe bringing even some relief into northern areas of North Carolina. Nice onshore flow for about a day, day and a half. And, of course, to the south of that, in the very warm to hot air and in the tropical air, we have potential tropical Cyclone 9. It is not a tropical depression. It is not a tropical storm. It is a potential tropical cyclone. This is something that the Hurricane Center started doing last year when they saw that there was need to put up tropical storm warnings because of the weather conditions that were going on, even though the technical definition of a tropical storm had not been met yet. And also, in most cases that they've used this, most of the time, it winds up being upgraded to a tropical depression or a tropical storm. The difference is that there's no closed circulation yet. There is a broad low that has developed in the Bahamas, and we're going to take a look at that. They started with the floater images now, which is good, so we can get nice and close and tight. One of the primary focuses for tonight is going to be the weather hysterics that are already out there, and they're being want to blame somebody or something. We can blame the European model because of the things that it did overnight and again during the daytime. And look, here's what I would say: don't forecast shop. You have the weather person that you like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be me, although it's nice if it is. But you have the weather person that you like. Stay with them, and stay with the one person. What winds up happening is, and I know this is something that is something I used to do when I was young. You watch everybody, and you, if you're a real weather geek, you're going to gravitate to the forecast and outlook that is going to be have the potential to have the most excitement with. But we're at a different place here now. We are older, so we don't do that anymore and haven't. But sometimes when people say to me, "Well, so and so said this. How come you're saying something different?" What do you want me to say? If you're forecast shopping, you're wasting my time. And I love it when people will ask me my opinion and then tell me, "Well, so and so said," and would say something different. Again, how are you supposed to respond to that? So just for the sake of at least keeping things less confusing or maybe not confusing, best to just kind of, stick with a core one or two people, and this way you can kind of just they give you solid information so that you know how to interpret it. And of course, when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes, your go-to site with regards to any information you need when it comes to decision making is not me. It's weather.gov or nhc.noaa.gov. So we're going to get started tonight, and I think you can see on the left there, in the middle left, is WPC's forecast for the rainfall for the next 7 days. And what's interesting to me is when you look at how they have the heavy rain outlined from this, it's not in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's not into Alabama or Mississippi or the Florida Panhandle. It's along the east coast of Florida and along the southeast coast of the U.S. up until you get to coastal North Carolina. That's where they've got their big rains. So if you follow the path here of where they have the big rainfalls, they are leaning to the idea that you're going to see something staying maybe just off the Florida East Coast or along the Florida East Coast and along or just off the southeast coast of the U.S. and then turning to the northeast. So WPC, as those of you who are regulars here know, watching this every day, they're usually pretty good. They get a very good sense of what's happening in the long range. So I think it's worth paying attention to with respect to where they've got the heavy rainfall, because they're kind of giving you a clue as to which models they're leaning toward. And as far as the rainfall in the Northeast over the next 7 days, which takes us, by the way, to next Thursday night, it's mostly light, generally under a quarter of an inch, and in some cases under a tenth of an inch. More rains on the order of an inch to an inch and a half across the Great Plains. I'm sorry, wrong twice. The Great Lakes. Okay, that's what I've been trying to say here. The Great Lakes, and also some scattered heavy rainfall amounts up and down the Rockies and in the Pacific Northwest, even getting down into Northern California. And as far as severe weather risk is concerned tonight, we are looking at a slight risk in New Jersey and southeastern Pennsylvania, but that has already played itself out on the radar. We still have a slight risk down through Delaware, eastern Maryland, and eastern and southeastern West Virginia. Excuse me. Inside a marginal risk. And then we have 2 severe thunderstorm watches working right now, and 1 tornado watch running up from North Texas through Oklahoma and Kansas, and then you have a watch up in Iowa and into northwestern Illinois, and then you have this tornado watch in southeastern Minnesota and in southwestern Wisconsin. So that is part of the next frontal boundary that is beginning to push to the east. And of course, if you're watching this on a replay, it's 7:12 p.m. Eastern time is the time that this map is dated. So you want to make sure you go to your local National Weather Service forecast office to get any updated information on severe weather, and you can find that by going to weather.gov. All right, let's jump to the U.S. satellite view and take a look at all the features tonight, because they're pretty obvious. You can actually even see what looks like the upper high with these very thin streams of clouds and the pop-up scattered thunderstorms that are showing up across parts of the southeast and back through the Tennessee Valley. These GO-16 satellites, satellite pictures are, excuse me, I'm just having a little bit of an allergy reaction right now. But you can see that the actual pop-ups there, how the detail of these maps, and of course the big swirl that is swinging through the northern plains and driving that severe weather event. And you also can see the cold front that is dropping southward through the northeast and into the mid-Atlantic states now, as we get some nice dry cool air from Canada. And you see the clouds and showers and thunderstorms that are east of the Bahamas, which is with potential tropical cyclone number 9. So with that in mind, we are going to now switch over. I am going to put the maps up on the screen so I don't make the same mistake I did yesterday. And there you are. So if you can see me in a box like you are seeing now, and your chat is on the side, that's how I know that the window is open. And now we can switch over to potential tropical cyclone 9. Now this is the Hurricane Center's forecast, and one of the things that they stated in their discussion, that the that the risk for changes here in this forecast are pretty high, and the uncertainty level is higher than it normally is for a number of reasons. Track having the big part of this. Also in intensity, because if the track may ultimately determine intensity, and intensity of this system may ultimately determine the track. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we move along. But they're forecasting it to become a depression sometime overnight or during the day Friday, and then strengthen to a tropical storm overnight Friday night into Saturday, bringing it just inland into Florida, and then weakening it to a depression as it moves up toward northeast Florida, and then comes back out over the open waters of the Atlantic off the near the Georgia South Carolina coastline. So I would just say to you that in terms of this forecast, I don't know that you can really glean a whole lot of value from it, if only because of the fact that there really is a very high degree of uncertainty here. And I just don't think we're really going to know how this is going to play out until we see the actual development take place. In other words, I want to wait for this to close off a circulation and actually become a tropical depression and see if we are going to see something that is going to intensify, or is it going to stay weak? Because if we wind up seeing a system that intensifies, we are going to take a track here that will be further to the right. And the reason why I say that, or in other words, further east, and the reason why I say that is because the models are clear, and with what we're seeing in the upper air on the water vapor imagery and a few other tools, that there's an upper low in the Gulf of Mexico. If this is a system that is stronger, is a stronger system, so that you have to go higher up into the atmosphere to determine the steering, you're going to probably wind up taking this more to the north. If this winds up being a weak system that never really gets going, which is what the GFS does, you're going to wind up taking a weak low, or maybe just an open trough westward across Florida and into the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. The European gets its solution today by developing this system in a much more robust way than the GFS or some of the other models. So that really is the primary difference. What the European is suggesting, that this is going to develop strong enough so it's going to react more to those upper features than the low-level flow, which will tend to be more to the west or west-northwest. So here is the upper air, and you can see it pretty well here because I did open the window tonight. And I'm going to review, we're going to go through the European model, and I will go through the GFS. What I want to also address here is the weather hysterics. And I bring that up because it started last night with the overnight run. And this is what the overnight run did. And here it is. So you will watch starting from this evening. This is what the European has for this evening, with a surface low that is somewhere near 24 and 74. And oddly enough, that right now looks like where we are seeing some kind of surface low trying to develop. Seems to be wanting to develop to the northeast of an earlier low that looks like that low that's to the southwest has fallen apart, and that we may be seeing some sort of new center that is trying to form northeast of the Bahamas. Incidentally, we have tropical storm warnings up for the northwestern Bahamas, including the Abacos and Grand Bahama Island. Many of those islands and some others, of course, just finished going through the devastation of Dorian. So here we are just a little over a week later, and they've got tropical storm warnings up because of this. So this was really something that you really hoped wasn't going to happen. But sometimes in weather and in seasons, things don't repeat exactly, but there is a certain commonality to it, a certain rhyming that goes on, and maybe that's what we're seeing here. Now, this was last night's European run, which took this over the northwestern Bahamas and started to really develop this low as it moved it northward. Then it kind of nudged it to the east for a little while, and then it shot it up northwest, up the coast and into eastern Canada. And then this second system that comes up here into the northwestern Bahamas late next week is the system that we were talking about the last couple of days that's going to come out of the Leeward Islands. And that one just kind of gets captured and drawn up northward as well. So naturally, the weather freaks out there were all salivating like crazy when they saw this. But yet, look, what I would say to you is, when you see something on social media and somebody posts that up, and the question you need to ask that person is, how did it get there? How did that get there? Why is it there? We all can see what the map is doing. None of us need someone to tell us that on the European last night there is a Category 3 hurricane southeast of Hatteras. You don't need an expert to tell that, or someone that's knowledgeable in meteorology. But I guarantee you that almost all of them, almost all of them would not be able to tell you how that got there. Why did the model do this? And that's what's really important, because if you understand what's going on in the upper atmosphere and in the middle atmosphere and the lower atmosphere, that gets you to a certain point, then you can figure out what may really happen in this time frame and not what the model is doing. So from last night, we have today's, which did roughly the same thing, except maybe a little bit further to the east, taking a storm up the coast but just offshore. Looks like it makes a close pass to Montauk and Cape Cod and then winds up going south of Nova Scotia with we'll call this the parent hurricane, and then you have the child hurricane behind it, and the parent is actually creating a trough that is dragging the child behind. If there is, if that's how you want to look at this. But now we're going to take a look at just exactly what's happening here. So first off, let's look at the floater imagery, which is supposed to be looping. And I'm not sure why it's not, but it was a little while ago. Now it's on a still shot for some reason. But the bottom line is we are seeing it getting a little better organized. You're seeing that the look here where the thunderstorms seem to be getting a bit more concentrated northeast of Turks and Caicos, and it's right around 24 and 74, 24, 74, 25, 75, maybe right in there that we're seeing perhaps some kind of a low center. Here's the reconnaissance aircraft, by the way, that has been in there this evening. And you'll notice that it really hasn't been finding winds much in excess of 20 knots. Maybe there are some 20 to 30 knot bands that it just flew out of. But we're not, the reconnaissance aircraft was not able to really close off a center. What we appear to have is either some kind of broad low or sort of a stretched out inverted trough. Maybe because you have southeast winds up here and you've got northeast winds here, some kind of low perhaps trying to form up in this region here at about, let's say, 24 and 74 and a half, somewhere in there. That would be close to where the main convection is, so we might want to pay close attention to that overnight. And again, why is this not turning? I want this to loop. This is supposed to loop. Well, we can try it on this one. Well, at least when we look at it on the enhanced, and no, by the way, if you look closely, that's not an eye, okay, just so we're clear. But we're not really seeing a whole lot of turning here, so I'm not seeing any kind of distinct low-level circulation at this stage of the game. So we have some work to do as far as development is concerned. It's not there yet, and it's not quite to a depression, but conditions are going to become more favorable for tropical cyclone development as we move through Friday and again on Saturday. I want to bring up the water vapor imagery so we can take a look at what is happening, and again, and trying to tie it all in to where this is going to go in the longer haul. And I'm not 100% sure yet how this is going to play. Sometimes I feel like whatever it is I pick is the one that it's not going to be. So it does feel like that sometimes. So here's the look on the U.S. loop, and we saw that earlier. But I want to go to the water vapor. We'll go to the upper. Let's see if that's useful here. And actually it is. We'll use the upper, and then we'll switch to the middle, and then look at the lower. So I'm going to back it up to 48 frames. You can see plainly that at the upper levels of the atmosphere, 500 millibars and higher, or 400 millibars and higher, I believe, you've got a really, really dominant feature here with this upper low that is sitting. Here we go. Oh, come on, folks. Thank you. So here's your upper low, and at the moment, where the upper low is creating strong winds aloft that extend over all this disturbed weather. It has actually relaxed a little bit. It hasn't quite gotten relaxed enough that you would see tropical cyclone development. But what we're going to watch for is this upper low here and where it goes. Because if it drops southward a bit into the Gulf of Mexico, in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico, and a little bit more westward than that. Let me just redraw the arrows. So let's say it drops toward the Bay of Campeche. That is going to set up aloft. The flow is going to go this way. You're going to, at the same time, you're going to have an upper high that is going to be building in this region here. And that is where you're going to have your surface low underneath that developing weak upper high and a decent outflow setting up with this upper low pulling to the west. That's what I think the European is seeing, that idea. And that would create a system that is that has some, let's call it verticalness to it, so you can go higher up in the atmosphere to look for the steering. So it would probably respond to this upper low and move more northwest or north-northwest over time and take it up closer to the southeast coast. Now, the other option is that this upper low never really quite gets far enough out of the way. Maybe it only gets to, say, somewhere south of New Orleans. Well, you're still going to have this flow, but maybe not as much of an upper high that tries to develop. So you get, as a result, more shear and a surface low that's going to be weaker, shallower, and going to want to go more west-northwest. I think that is what the GFS is seeing. It is seeing what it believes is a stronger wind shear pattern that's going to impact this and make for a weaker system. And the European is going to try to, is saying the opposite. It's saying, and the ICON model is saying the opposite as well, getting that upper low in the Gulf of Mexico more west or southwest, and getting it far enough out of the way so you actually see some significant development from this. And that's where what I was getting to before with suggesting that we're basically going to have the wave, the system tell us what's going to happen. If we see signs that this thing is getting better organized tomorrow night and Friday, and it does become a tropical storm rather quickly and begins to steadily strengthen into Saturday, I would bet you then what you'll be looking at is a system that's going to take a track more to the right. If you see where it doesn't seem to be getting its act together and the shear is not relaxing, then you're going to see it take a track more to the west-northwest. So this upper low here, I believe, is key to all of this. And by the way, you can also see here the frontal systems that are in play. Sorry, lost my mouse. But you've got this upper trough right in here that is dropping southeastward. And in the east, you get that northern part of the jet stream is taking a bit of a dip. And it's allowing this air mass up in Canada to push southeastward with a high probably headed for the Gulf of Maine during the day on Friday and into Friday night. So that brings some really cool air into the northeast. And I don't know about you, but I'm kind of happy about that, actually. So I'm going to switch this. Let's go to, if it lets me turn it off. All right, that's nope, it's this one. Okay, so let's go to the mid-level and take a look at the mid-level. And I think you can see it actually better here at this level of the atmosphere, where you're seeing that very strong upper low extending down into the mid-levels here, and the strong upper air winds that are still moving across the Northwest Caribbean and over the system that is just east of the Bahamas. A lot of dry air right in here, and that's getting funneled back west and southward into Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty obvious there with that yellow streak. And of course, take a look at this dry air that is coming now into the northeast and is going to be pushing southward as that frontal boundary pushes and the high builds down. Eventually, the high is just going to be so overwhelming, and you're going to have this, this fairly decent gradient down from the Carolinas down southward to whatever low pressure that is going to wind up developing off the Florida coast. Okay, so the low levels, just want you look at this to see if we can gain a clue on whether we're getting some good moisture inflow here or not. And indeed, when we look at it, you can see the low-level moisture is pretty concentrated in the Bahamas. There's quite a bit of dry air being pulled down into the Gulf of Mexico thanks to that upper low. And you've got dry air up into the Carolinas and offshore. Explains a lot when you look at all of that dry air, that there's not a whole lot of thunderstorm activity going on in the southeast. There's some scattered cells, but not much more. And you can pick out the cold front that is moving through, and then the next system that's approaching for the weekend, and the system in the Pacific Northwest. It's good to, by the way, spend a little time with these water vapor imagery, these water vapor loops, because they really can tell you a lot about what's happening in the overall atmosphere. And then you gain a pretty good understanding of why models are doing, may be doing what they're doing. So here's the 12Z European run. And there's your big high on Friday, and there's your system again. The European is pretty robust with its development, takes it up and then out. And the reason why it does that, and I'm going to come to maybe a little bit of early speculation here. If you remember back to Dorian, one of the things I said early on was that Dorian the upper air was not favorable for Dorian to come up the east coast to impact the northern mid-Atlantic to southern New England. And the reason I said that was because of the dominant northwest flow or westerly flow that seemed to be in play. And in fact, when you look at what we have right now, we pretty much have that northwest flow going all the way down into Virginia. Now, this was the map as of this morning, and as we come around, you've got this upper high sitting right on the Mississippi-Arkansas border, and you have this weakness here. You also could see the little reflection of the upper low at the 500 millibar level in the Gulf of Mexico, and right in here is where you're watching to see some sort of surface low to develop. So the upper air, when it's like this, is not the kind of upper air that you would that you would see if you were dealing with a storm that was going to come up the East Coast given this particular time frame. The flow coming around this high is primarily from east to west, so any shallow system is going to be moved along. However, if you look at if this is a more developed system, then it might respond to this weakness that this upper low is creating, and you could make a case for something to move up further to the north, and maybe this ridge winds up eroding over time. So that's a possibility that you'd have to consider. And as we go forward into the weekend, one of the things that does eventually happen is that the ridge just kind of reorients itself and splits in two. By the time we get to Monday on the European, you've got an upper high back through Arkansas and Missouri right here. Here's your other upper high, the back edge of it, that's sitting out in the Atlantic. And of course, here is potential tropical cyclone trapped in the middle. But look what you have from Virginia northward. You not only have this northwest flow, but there's a short wave that's dropping down through New England on Monday. And that's with the next cold front that's going to be coming through, that's going to look pretty much just like the one we had. So it would argue to me that it'd be pretty tough to drag something up the East Coast with this unless you can get this system that is in southeastern Canada and over Labrador, Newfoundland to pull out fast enough. And it's hard for me to imagine where you have a northwest flow, that the southern edge of this northwest flow is so dominant from the Great Lakes down to well off the North Carolina coast. I don't know how you're going to be able to bring something up the coast with a setup like this. If anything, you would argue that if this system doesn't get out of the way, you'll get a short wave trough to come around, an arm will come around, pick this up, and it will get ejected to the east or east-northeast. And I think that's what the hurricane tracking models are looking at. That's what they're seeing. Where the model shows this trying to come up the east coast is because it's pulling that out. It misses picking up the system, and then suddenly you have big pressure rises going on all across New England and upstate New York and back through the Great Lakes. A big upper high building here. This thing is kind of trapped in there. So there's a number of ways that this could go. The path of least resistance, I think, is to turn it more toward the northeast. The European, on the other hand, says no, it wants to take it more toward the north. I will tell you that in instances like this in the past, that I can remember, just about every single time, the system wound up going out to the east, even though that there was an upper ridge building like this to the north of it. And especially if it's a well-developed system, it's going to be looking at the winds higher up in the atmosphere. So that would be another argument, in my view, against something trying to impact the East Coast. And unfortunately, with the European, we can't really see. They only get the 500 millibar maps. We can't really see what it shows beyond that. So maybe the better approach is if we go to the Atlantic view here and take a look at all the players. So you've got this trough dropping. The cold front that's going through now. Another short wave for Monday. This drops another cold backdoor front through us and pushes it south. And that system swings over to Newfoundland come Tuesday. And here's where you start to build that big ridge. Again, the European says that this trough misses. This trough here is going to miss the tropical system and pull away to the north. That pulls out well out to the east, and then it responds to this ridge. And then ultimately, by the way, if you notice, the jet stream is getting ready to collapse again on the European by the time we get to later next week, and then that gets kicked out to the northeast from there. Surprisingly, the upper air doesn't look anything like what some of the models were doing a few days ago with dropping a deep trough into the middle of the country. With strong ridges, one off the east coast and one off the west coast. The GFS here is, of course, different. The GFS argues, which I will bring up now, the GFS argues a whole different setup here in the east. Instead of that flow you just saw from the European, this has a much more gentle west-southwest flow. And it comes to a completely different outcome because of the fact that, it's got a weaker system that goes further to the west. In fact, if you notice, the GFS actually builds the ridge southwestward across Florida into the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. So that would kind of push any system that is weak into the northeast Gulf and then turn it northwestward or even northward. And there's an upper low. That upper low is just south of the Louisiana coast. So it moves far enough west, but it doesn't really drop southward so that you can create a strong outflow like we saw the other models do. So the GFS paints a picture where you're going to wind up with a weaker system, and that's what the maps are showing here. We'll bring up the surface of the new GFS, and we'll have, this is with the radar, by the way, give you an idea of how the model sees the radar every 6 hours. You'll notice right through tomorrow evening it's not really showing a whole lot of convection here, and you never really get this model to wrap that convection around the center like you would see in a developing tropical system. So it keeps it basically as a weak open wave. In the meantime, back to our weather for a moment. You've got, here's that onshore flow. Friday, it's nice high, sitting right over Portland, Maine. I can't wait till tomorrow. Temperatures in the 60s all day. That's just going to feel so darn good. And then that high pulls out. The winds start to bend around more to the south. We get a little upper trough to come through here early Sunday morning with a few showers, and then that gets out of the way. And here comes high pressure and higher pressures, but the air behind that little trough is just as warm, is actually warmer than the air ahead of it, and probably a bit more humid too. So that'll carry us into Monday, and here's Monday. I'm going to change colors. I'm getting a little tired of that seeing red. Let's go to the blue. On Monday, here's your next cold front, getting ready to come through Monday afternoon, kind of like what we're seeing now, which means that this area down here in Virginia, North Carolina, once you lose the onshore flow, it's going to get hot again later in the weekend, and maybe even before later in the weekend. It may start on Saturday, but this is pretty much wash, rinse, repeat. It's going to be the same thing. We're going to see that front drop down almost to North Carolina here by the time we get to Tuesday. And by the way, at this point on the GFS, no tropical system, okay? So just bear that in mind. And that high is going to stay in control Wednesday and probably into Thursday. You still have an onshore flow until it finally drops southward Thursday night and Friday toward the end of the week, where you get a bit more of a south or a southwest wind to set up going into next weekend. And of course, there are other complications here. I want to just touch base on the other system that the Hurricane Center is watching, and that is the wave that is out off the African coast. And this is another thing that the model has sort of changed on and done a few things, at least the GFS has. The last few runs, it actually develops two tropical systems here, okay? So you've got, there's this one and this one, which is the wave that's off south and west of the Cabo Verde Islands now, that the models was doing all sorts of crazy things with for next week. The GFS now keeps showing two of these systems very, very close up together. And Johnny Quest, you asked this the other day about a 5 absorbing a 1. Well, in this particular instance, you're going to have two systems close together, and perhaps one doesn't absorb the other, but they do work in tandem. And you'll notice that the one to the north lifts up, and actually on this run, it gets away from the system that's now approaching the leewards, but there's a weakness that gets left behind by this, and this kind of responds to it a bit by trying to move more north of the islands than instead of moving across into the leeward islands. And in some of the prior runs, these two were actually the second one pulled up northwestward and wound up pulling the lead system wound up pulling it northward right behind it. I don't even know if that's real, that you're going to have two of those systems out there. These models sometimes can be, not that it couldn't happen, of course it could, but sometimes these models get so far-fetched and do such weird things, even though when you look at them at first in the longer range, they're not really showing any indication of that. And then suddenly you get into the middle range, and lo and behold, that wasn't shown before. The European, by the way, doesn't quite have that at all. It actually develops that second wave. As I said earlier, that whole parent-child thing, it keeps this wave moving across it weak. It's hard to find until it gets into the Eastern Caribbean, and then it gets going as it heads towards the Bahamas. With the parent low, if you want to refer to the lead system as the parent, and here's the trailing system as the child, that's an example of how, when two hurricanes get close together. One, in this instance, the lead storm to the north is creating a weakness that is pulling the second one up right behind it. And if you go back and look at 1955, Connie and Diane, those two storms that came into North Carolina less than 4 days apart. and impacted the weather in the Mid-Atlantic and in the Northeast. That was August of 55, I believe. That was the 54, 55, 56 were three very interesting years for hurricanes in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. You had a slew of them. So just go back in the archives at the Hurricane Center and take a look at what they what the history is of Connie and Diane. It is really very, very interesting, those two storms and how they behaved and the outcomes. Flooding rains, a big deal because of the storms coming so close together, and you got heavy rainfall from the first, only to be compounded by as much or even more rain from the second. So look, here's the bottom line. The bottom line is try not to look at every piece of weather information that is put out there, okay? Take it a step at a time and try and just kind of limit yourself to one or two really good, two people that you think are good, and this way you don't get confused. That's what winds up happening with weather shoppers, okay? Just don't weather shop, okay? The weather person involved gets annoyed by weather shoppers. All right, so Reaver 501 will kick off the talk tonight, although before I say that, I just want to tell you, Javon Perry, you want to wake up to 30 feet of snow. You know what? I'm going to come back to something. Hang on. I just want to go back to, I saw this yesterday because one of my members on the Patreon chat board asked me about the climate models, the CAN-SIPs and the CFS and the CFS monthly and all the rest of it, and whether it was any good or not. And I want to bring this up because, okay, that's not the sector I want to look at, so let me switch sectors here. Okay, so here is the U.S., and we will look at the 2-meter temperature anomaly. I happened to see this yesterday, and unless it changed. So here is October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June, July of next year, August, okay? So let's run this again. So if you're a snow lover, all right? So September, kind of a warmish October, then normal to maybe a little bit below in some places, November, east of the Mississippi, a few pockets, plus or minus, but the changes are pretty small. By the way, you notice that some of the colors here on the scale on the side, we're talking about 1/4 degree temperature changes. Oh, almost made a mistake. Hold on. I'll run it again. Sorry. I forgot to bring the window up. So again, for snow lovers, just to set the table. So here's September. These are temperatures below and above normal. A warm October, a colder November. Much of the southeast is below normal, up to about New York City along the east coast, above normal in northern New England. And then much of the mid-Atlantic, the southeast, Florida, the Great Lakes, and southern New England below average for January. February, also colder than average. March, a large area of the plains, Great Lakes, and the mid-Atlantic states and to southern New England below average in temperatures, going all the way down to the southeast, and still cold in April, still colder than normal in May, still colder than normal in June, near or slightly below normal in July, near or slightly below normal in August, okay? So if that's, I just ran through the next 12 months, which we know we can just kind of, you can write it in stone that this is going to verify, all right? Just bear that in mind. So Javon Perry, I can't guarantee you 20 inches of snow, but the climate models always give you that tiny little glimmer of hope. Reaver 501, you have been informed by Optimum that FiOS News is being replaced by News 12. That is correct. I hope that Joe Chaffee will appear on News 12 again for those of us who knew him back in the 90s. That ain't happening, okay? Just going to tell you right now, Reaver, that ain't happening. I will probably, do my occasional Channel 11 stints, one of which I'm doing on Saturday. But that doesn't happen very often. So you may see me on there. I'm doing one this Saturday. I'll be on at 5 and 10 o'clock. But no, I am going to be all the Joe Chaffee Show on YouTube, the meteorologistjoechaffee.com website, my 2 apps. One's my app, and my buddy Ben Scott works the Angry Weatherman app, which just came out. So if you have an Android device, download the Angry Weatherman. Okay, he's part of my little group. I'm going to be focusing all my time on online stuff and my Patreon platform. That is where I'm going to be. And you'll be able to find me there pretty much 24/7. So this will be very good, actually, starting November 15th. My last, technically, right now, that is supposedly my last day on Fios One News. So, right after that, it's going to be everything with regards to what I'm doing online. And that also means, by the way, that it will give me room to add a few things that I would like to do with many of you, and with regards to producing more instructional videos. I'll have the time to do a lot of the stuff that I can't do right now because I'm spending 3 hours a day in the car and 8 hours a day in another building working for somebody else. So this is a huge positive. It's something I've actually was planning to do. The shutting of Fios One News just gave me that little push. Sometimes some people, you need to do something. You know what the right thing to do is, and you are, for one reason or another, you're a bit afraid. Change is not always an easy thing, and so you need a little bit of a push to come from some outside force. And that's what this is for me. It's getting me to do what I wanted to do for quite a long time. So I'm going to roll the dice, and we'll see what happens. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in a more, let's call it, complete weather experience, you might want to consider my platform on Patreon. It's just $2 a month. And while we have these tropical storms going on, we do extra posts and videos just for Patreon members. And you can message me anytime with questions or comments, and I usually get back fairly quickly. Most of the time, I try. So consider that. A lot of the folks that are on the chat board are part of the Patreon platform, and they all seem to like it. And I'm trying to make it grow and get better and better. That's my aim. So consider that. It goes a long way in supporting all the stuff that I'm doing. And by the way, that also applies during the winter time, because I will be doing a lot of extra stuff exclusively for Patreon members, and not really seeing much of it elsewhere. Ryan Ford, does the transfer of energy from one load to another that occurs in the winter apply to tropical entities as well? No, not really. Tropical systems usually just, they kind of are in their own little world. And that is, they're different from the cold core cyclones, which oftentimes you'll see one load die out and a new one take over. You don't really see that. You don't see that in the tropics. The tropical systems are all individual entities in and amongst themselves. They kind of create their own little world in a sense. Vince Robinson, thank you. I appreciate the encouragement. Yeah, you need a push sometimes when it comes to doing something on your own in your own business, especially if you've spent most of your life working for somebody else. Because there's a lot of stuff. Not just it's not just the stuff that you know and your expertise, but you got to learn a lot of other things like bookkeeping and making sure the bills are paid and all that sort of stuff. And I have all sorts of data spreadsheets and analytics and all these other things that I never really thought was part of the process. And boy, did I learn. And I found out that I actually enjoy this stuff. I find it very interesting. So yeah, I needed the push, and now we'll see where it takes me. Peter Bicker, no problem for joining late. What are my thoughts on the Euro model doing with the tropical system? I'll just give you the brief synopsis, Peter, because we really spent a lot of time tonight on the European. But the bottom line is, the European model is suggesting that this is going to be a much more well-developed system. And looking at the flow at the higher levels of the atmosphere, it would steer a more well-developed system further north and further east away from the coast than the weaker GFS. And it has to do with this big upper low in the Gulf of Mexico and how it behaves, because ultimately that is going to either create a very positive area of favorable conditions for it to develop, or it's going to stay in the way, keep it weak, and any kind of surface low is never able to close off, or if it does so very weakly, and you wind up like the GFS, which is basically sort of an open trough that goes to the west-northwest. I will say, and we talked about this at the beginning, that the Weather Prediction Center people, WPC, they you look at their rainfall map for the next 7 days, and that looks like they like the European. So I think what it really, at the end of the day, we're going to let this system tell us, okay? Because if it, as I said earlier, if this starts strengthening steadily during the day tomorrow and becomes a tropical depression and then a tropical storm, I think that's going to tell you that we might be seeing the European holding the upper hand here. But if we see this languishing, where we're sitting here at this time on Saturday and we still have kind of a weak open trough low, then I think you're going to see a weaker system that gets into the Gulf of Mexico, maybe becomes a tropical storm there, and brings rain up to the Gulf Coast. That's what it boils down to for me. And also, I don't particularly like the way the upper air is set up in the East Coast this week, because you still have this strong northwest flow across New England. And I just don't know how you're going to be able to bring something up the coast with that type of an upper air, particularly if it's a well-developed system. You're going to wind up seeing it get kicked out to the northeast, even if you've got an upper ridge sitting up over New England, and you're looking at that thinking, well, this thing should be going northwest or west. I don't know. I think you could wind up seeing it go more northeast. I've seen this set up before in the east, and you make a case for that, well, it should turn west, but in reality, it doesn't, because the steering currents you have to look for are way up in the atmosphere, and they may be more southwest up there. As far as, Scott, having Judah Cohen on, I can't really do it while I'm here because of the technical setup I have here with the computers and everything else. But once we get to the middle of November, and I'm doing my broadcasts from home, then there's no problem with me bringing guests on to live streams. In fact, I was thinking of maybe trying to get Bill Goodman to come on over the weekend if I can find him, but to talk about this. But I'm not 100. I don't want to guarantee that. And Joe Rayo isn't here tonight. He's off tonight. We'll see if he's back tomorrow, which I'm not 100% sure if he is. Maybe I'll try and get him on here for tomorrow night. Chuck Cardillo, long-range forecast for the winter is cold at times, mild at times, snow at times, rain at times. Exactly, it's the Chuckles the Clown model. I don't. When I was young once, a long time ago, I used to ask questions about the long range, mainly because I wanted to have some hope that there would be snowstorms on the horizon, and then I kind of learned very quickly that the long range was not the it just didn't do it for me. It never gave me a valuable piece of information that I was able to use to make a forecast on. Okay, so really, at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to for me, and that's why I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to much beyond the 10-day to 2-week time frame. And even when we look beyond 10 days, we do it in a very broad sense. So I would advise, that you'd be a much happier weather geek if you stay inside a reasonable time frame and don't try to take things out 3 to 6 months in advance. Because you know what? If you ask me, I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know that many people even do know the answer, what the answer is. They can give you there are some really good people that deal with the long range. And I admire them because they can wrap their heads around all this incredibly highly technical stuff that I have no clue. But more importantly, I don't even have a desire to have a clue about it. I like the short range. That's my world. And that to me is where I have the most fun. Ruru 25. So if I'm going to have more free time, will I be doing any fishing in South Florida? Well, I've got nothing planned at the moment, but once I get done with the Monday through Friday regular schedule and I get my life in order, there will be trips along the way. Anthony Orr pointing out on the 8 p.m. advisory, to which I will advise you about right now. And that 8 p.m. advisory is 23.7 north, 74.8 west, present movement stationary, top pressure of 1,008 millibars and 30 miles an hour on the wind. Tropical storm warnings, they pretty much haven't changed anything here. No changes. So still tropical storm warnings for all of the northwestern Bahamas, excluding Andros Islands. Andros Islands. So it is in effect for the Abacus and Grand Bahama and a bunch of other islands. And they're still saying in their advisory that a tropical cyclone is expected to form near the northwestern Bahamas by the weekend. Okay, so I'm going to give you a heads up early about what's going on this weekend. So here's my plan. First of all, tomorrow, weather in 5 tomorrow morning, so we'll update you on any overnight developments. Plus, we'll look at the weekend forecast. We will have our regular posts during the day. We will have our live stream tomorrow night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Maybe I can get Joe Rayo on to join me for that live stream. Saturday, since I'm working at WPIX in Manhattan, I will, assuming that we've got stuff to talk about with this, I will be doing my live stream probably figure around 11 or 11:30 a.m. All right, so we'll do a morning or right around lunchtime kind of live stream to get you up to date and to maybe take a peek at some of the models. I won't be able to do one Saturday evening because I won't be able to do. I'll be at Pix working there till 11. And then I won't be home until well after midnight, so I doubt you're going to want to stay up after midnight. I don't even want to stay up after midnight anymore. And then on Sunday, we will try and we'll do something at some point, maybe later in the day or Sunday evening. All right, so that's the preliminary schedule as far as Friday and the weekend is concerned. Thanks again for being here tonight. Don't forget the Patreon platform. If you are weather geeky, it is a good place to be. And we'll see you tomorrow.